Hey, what's up, podcast? It's Jeff. Just want to jump in here. This is a special bonus episode of Teach Better Talk. This is actually going to be the audio recording from a Facebook Live that our team is doing every single day, Monday through Friday, at 8 a.m. Eastern Time in our Facebook private group. You can get in that group at teachbettergroup.com or go on to Facebook and just search Teach Better Team. You'll see our page and then you'll see the group. Get in there. So here we go, a special bonus episode of Teach Better Talk pulled from one of our Facebook Live videos in our private group at teachbettergroup.com. Hope you enjoy.
This is my first time actually putting on real clothes at 7 a.m.
I'm actually wearing shorts below my polo right now. I didn't really mean to tell the world that, but that's kind of the world we're living in, right?
I'm not going to tell you about my bottoms.
I actually think, funny that you just mentioned that. I'm going to go a little bit off script here, but funny that you mentioned that because I think there's going to be a new fashion trend when all this is over where people wear really nice tops and like pajama pants, yoga pant bottoms. I just think that's going to happen because we're going to be so used to doing that. And
I'm here for it.
Yes, 100%. I'm on board for that. I think I'm okay with it. I think I can get behind that. I think we should. And if it doesn't happen, maybe you and I, we can make that. That
could be our fashion thing. If this education thing doesn't work, we're going to New York Fashion Week.
There you go. Absolutely. So, Shemaine, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. This is our daily drop-in. We do it Monday through Friday, every single morning at 8 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Central Time. You are coming from Illinois, so it's 7 for you. I appreciate you getting up a little earlier than I had to, so that's fantastic. We already have a couple people, Alex, Jeff Kaplan, saying good morning, kind of coming on in. So take your time, come on in so you can enjoy this amazing conversation. So before we get started, Shemaine, just tell me a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background. I'm sorry to say this is the first time that we have actually been able to connect in person. So I'm really excited for this conversation. Joe and Brianna, good morning. Welcome. Come on in, guys. This is going to be a great conversation as we sip our coffee and get to know each other a little bit.
I have water because I don't drink coffee.
That's okay. That's okay. You're allowed.
But good morning, everybody. I am Charmaine Bertrand. I am actually an assistant professor at Illinois State University, where I'm an assistant professor of elementary ed. I'm called a generalist because I really don't specialize in literacy or science or math. My whole goal, my focus of my research is to prepare pre-service teachers for socioeconomically and racially diverse schools. So I really focus on centering equity in the work that I do, and making sure that teachers understand that we have a very diverse population of students and we have to change the way that we do things in order to meet those needs of those students. And so that's what I focus a lot on. Prior to being a professor, this is year 3 for me, so I'm moving closer to tenure, but I was a 4th grade teacher in Northern Virginia. And so in that role, I was there for 8 years. I've taught in both a Title I school and a non-Title I school. So in those roles, I really got to develop what I wanted to contribute to education, and that is to make sure that we're centering equity and that we are looking out for those that we have labeled marginalized.
Wow, that's fantastic. I love how she speaks so eloquently about all of these things. Whether you're listening on a podcast, whether you're watching live, you're literally just getting so much awesomeness already from Shemaine. So thank you so much. So I love the discussion about centering equity, right? I think this has to happen on a larger scale, just in education in general, because I think a lot of districts and schools are going through sort of this transition. But I also think that the current situation we're in is highlighting a lot of inequities in education. We're seeing states across the country have to deal with the fact that they can't grade work because it's not an equitable situation. We've had states that don't have an equitable technology access, equitable internet access. And I think and hope that some of these magnifications of these inequities are going to move the needle. But what is your perspective so far in terms of how is our current situation started to magnify some inequities and maybe push the conversation about equity in education a bit?
I know this sounds crazy, but I think one of the best things that's happened with COVID-19 is that it has really highlighted the inequities that exist. They've already been there. We've known. Yeah. I think that we've mostly known that they've existed, but this actually puts a light on it. So now you're looking and you're saying, okay, we're moving to e-learning. However, we're not thinking about, okay, what's the impact of that on especially students who do not have the resources to go on the internet. I know that a lot of schools have these 100%, like we give you devices, but you have to have the internet to get on those devices and do the work, right? So that's one in itself. I think so too that we are actually seeing the need for free and reduced lunch students. Like now schools are having to figure out how to get meals to these students. A lot of students were depending on breakfast and lunch, right? And so now they don't have that opportunity to actually go to school to eat. And I think the biggest thing is school has been a safe place for a lot of students, especially students who have abusive situations at their homes. Just being in that space gave them security. And so now they don't have that opportunity to attend school. And I think that this is just further highlighting things that already existed. One of the things that I'm doing with my pre-service teachers is I am having them reimagine what school is going to look like after COVID-19, because I do not believe schools will be the same. And so this is honestly for us, I tell them that you all are going to be the first teachers to really accept positions after COVID-19. But what would school look like if we center equity now? So how can we start to look at that opportunity gap and figure out, okay, what do I need to do more of? Now I know that there's a gap with students who are racially and socioeconomically diverse. So now how can I contribute to that?
I love it. So this is also magnifying those insecurities and inequities from the home environment to the school, because we no longer have the environment to control, to equalize, to bring some of those equities to a level playing field. So it's like the whole Maslow's before Bloom's argument, right? So we used to be able to, in our physical locations, go, this is a safe space, this is a safe environment, you are fed, you are cared for, your basic needs are met, so now you can learn, right? So that's sort of like the goal of the environment of school. Now we are having students in their home environment, which we cannot control. So we can't control whether they have access to internet. We can't control whether they have an abusive home, whether they have 4 or 5 siblings. I know when I taught, I had a lot of older siblings taking care of younger siblings because both parents work during the day. So if you have parents that are essential workers, you have siblings taking care of siblings. And this is where I really think we have to have grace for our students, understanding for our students, and we really just have to focus on some of those SEL needs for our students, some of those connections so they know they're supported, as opposed to going, well, we better make sure we cover Unit 7 in our math book, right? There's a really different approach to education. And I love what you talked about and that assignment that you talked about where your students are reimagining education, because I think one thing, as you mentioned, that I want to piggyback on is that education should look different after this. It should not look the same. And I'm hoping if we can take some of the socio-emotional aspects of what we care about as teachers, some of the Maslow'ian focuses we have as teachers, and some of those equity pieces that are being highlighted right now, and transform what our classrooms as individual teachers and individual schools and individual districts look like, I think that can be a huge silver lining that we can do it. So Bree, I just want to mention the comments here for those people listening later here on the podcast. So Bree just read an article that said our children's service cases have decreased 50% because no one's reporting them. That is crazy to me. And it's super scary because you have this army of reporters, which are teachers and educators and nurses and counselors, that is now no longer having access. So when you look at the data, you're going to see a huge decrease in abuse in all of these things, but it's not because it's not happening. It's because it's not being seen. And that's terrifying. I'm going to let you kind of riff on that for a second, because I'm sure you have a ton more value to add to that topic. But I just wanted to bring up that comment real quick.
I think that one of the things that teachers are known for is playing many roles in positions. So we not only educate, right, but we're nurses, we're mandatory reporters. So we have to report when abuse is occurring. We're cheerleaders because we have to make sure that everything is going well with our students. We're lawyers sometimes because there's debates that happen in the classroom and we have to play a role. And then we're also judges and juries at the same time. So like we play a lot of different roles. And so for our students, one of the things that I'm thinking about now is how our students, not to say in that their parents and their families are not giving them those different supports and needs, but like for me personally, my kitchen table is my office in the classroom at the same time. So it's really hard to be, supportive in that. And so one of the biggest concerns that I have right now is how our students getting what they need social and emotionally, and when I think about the abuse situation, like I was saying before, school has been a safe place. And I don't think that we realize what school represents for so many. And this is definitely one of those opportunities that teachers have to make a decision. Am I going to continue to try to get that instruction into them? Or am I going to stop, pause, and take care of just those social and emotional needs of my students because I don't know what they're receiving? And that's a decision that even as a professor, I had to make. Like I had so many projects and things that were due. I had to cut those out. I had to modify. I spent just a class at one point just saying, like, how are you feeling? What's going on with you? Because for a lot of my students, this is a grieving process to get picked up right after spring break and not come back. That's a process. Before we even started, I was telling you, I think I'm in a grieving process because like I'm sitting here missing just the little things of going on campus. And a lot of districts have already called the rest of the school year, which I think that's going to be probably everyone eventually. So
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, they haven't called it yet, but I'm just like,
I hear you.
Start new. But I think that one of the important factors here is that we have to think about how can we support our students' just social and emotional needs. We might not get to those math goals or standards that we had planned. We might not get to the literacy standards, and it's okay. And I think that's teachers also need to think about their self and mental health, like what they need.
Yeah. So much awesomeness just came out of your mouth. I'm going to try to dissect it a little bit. A lot of amazing things right there. So one of the big things is that some of those socio-emotional needs, I want to like highlight that for just a second. So Brian Zwemke, who's an amazing Illinois principal, actually said school is also a safe place for adults. Being able to see their friends, work, and family is a big deal. So like that touches on what you were saying about the fact that like adults have to take care of themselves, students have to take care of themselves. And I want to like just tell everybody listening, watching now, later, like whenever you're seeing this or hearing this, right? It's okay to not be okay right now. Yes. It's okay to not be okay right now. It's okay to not be perfect right now. Mm-hmm. It's okay to have grace for yourself. It's okay to have grace for your students. It's okay to give them that little extra wiggle room, that little extra buffer. You don't have to be hounding them about that assignment they didn't turn in. You don't have to be beating yourself up because that video lesson you recorded wasn't perfect because you heard your cat or your kids in the background. Like we're all in this. Something I talked in a previous interview with someone on was that this is not just distance learning. So like this isn't something that we all voluntarily did, right? Like we didn't just go, hey, let's try this cool experiment where we change education for a month and see if we can do distance learning. No, this is a pandemic crisis. Like this is literally a traumatic worldwide pandemic event. So this is not just distance learning or e-learning or whatever we're calling it. This is learning in crisis. This is learning in a time of crisis. So we can't expect it to just be business as usual or just checking off boxes. We absolutely need to be worried about the emotional and social health of every stakeholder, learner, and teacher in our schools and buildings, and principals as well. I talk to administrators all the time, and they're just trying to figure it out the same way. So I love that you focused on that. Absolutely. So what are some things? I love the tip about just asking your students how you're doing. So maybe instead of that assignment that you give your students for Monday or for the week, maybe next week or next Monday through Tuesday or however you're doing your assignment or reaching out to your students, maybe you just go, fill out this needs assessment. Tell me how you're doing. Or schedule a call where we can talk one-on-one so we can connect and I can see how you're doing. I think that's so huge. Are there any other tips or ideas you have to really look out for those socio-emotional needs, especially in our high needs populations?
Understanding too, we were talking earlier about the gap, right, between some having internet and others not. So although we have wonderful things that we can do for those who do, such as like Flipgrid or Google Hangout or having Zoom, a lot of these things are now made free because of the circumstances. Think about what you can do for those students who do not have access, whether that is mailing them a letter. I have some former pre-service teachers that are now teaching, and one of my students former students mailed all of their students letters because they knew that many of them did not have access to the internet and they still wanted to touch base with them. Others are calling their students on the phone, texting parents, trying to arrange to have those conversations with the students. One of the coolest things that I've been seeing is these parades that teachers are doing through neighborhoods and communities.
Yes.
Kind of different, kind of like, okay. But I think that just brings a smile to students' faces. And I think that as teachers, like it's one more thing to add to the list, but making sure that we're connecting with our students. And you were mentioning earlier about grace. And so I made a big mistake. And so it's going to all tie in together. So one of the things that I did is thank you for trusting me. But one of the things that I did with my students is, I asked them if they were okay for the first 3 weeks. I think I was a little bit obsessed and consumed with this whole COVID-19. So I was, asking them all the time, are you all okay? I just want to check on you. I just want to make sure everything's right. And so now it's been about 3 weeks. And so one of the biggest things that we have to learn out of the course is lesson planning. And so I moved into that conversation a little bit gradually, and I had them start writing objectives. And so one of the things that came out of that is I had the due date, they turned in the objectives, and for a minute, I thought there was a sense of normalcy. And so I'm grading it. And then after I submitted grades, I looked and I said, wait a minute. I really just screwed up. I was like, I'm sitting here thinking that there's a timeline on when people should be okay. Or because this is something that I'm teaching, now it's back to normal a little bit so I can begin to start the process of instruction and I can grade fairly. And so I started to think about it. I said, wait a minute, for this, I'm going to have to be a little different. I'm going to have to add not only grace, I'm going to have to add empathy, and I'm also going to have to add equity. I don't know really what their circumstances are at this moment. So I'm going to have to change the way that I do things. And so I wrote them a letter on Friday, literally a letter. It was an email, but it was a letter. And I apologized. I apologized to them for making the assumption that we could move forward. And so in this process, I want teachers to have grace with themselves because, again, this is a pandemic. I was really getting annoyed for a little bit with all these articles about like e-learning and best practices for it. This is not a best practice e-learning situation. This is a crisis, and we're being reactive to that crisis. And so I think that with that being said, if you make a mistake, it's okay. It's all good. Just go back and make sure that you fix that mistake.
Yeah, you are 1,000% correct. I mean, we did a similar thing. I love that you mentioned that. We did a similar thing on the Teach Better team. We've actually created a ton of like free resources, downloads, access to teachers. And I think at a certain point, I even stopped and we did some live videos and discussions about you don't have to use these right now just because they're available. Like it's okay. Like we wanted to make these resources so that you can be you can have the tools you need to be successful when you're ready. But that also doesn't mean that you have to go to this website or this resource and use all of it right now. And I think that was a really important conversation. I think that is a really important conversation. I think Brian Zwemke says it really well. He goes, it's compassion over compliance. Like right now is not about your students being compliant, your staff being compliant, your support staff being compliant. It's about like all of us banding together, making sure we're okay as humans. So it's not even about like, in my opinion, it's not even about like teacher to student, student to like, it's about like, are we all okay? You know, like I think if we can do everything with that lens that you're really kind of harping on right now, I think like we're going to come out better than we started this. And I think that's going to be a positive for education. I also love that you model your reflective practice and your equity with your students. I think that's absolutely amazing. The fact that you showed your own college students, your pre-service teachers, like, look, I messed up and I'm admitting it. Because I think humility right now is one way to emotionally connect with your students, because you're going to have students that like, I can't figure out how to fill in this Google form. I can't figure out how to access this content. Or you have parents that have never used, you know, a computer for learning before, trying to help their fourth grader, third grader, second grader navigate all these new tools. So like, I think it goes beyond that. Absolutely. So I think those are huge, huge, huge components.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about this. I've talked to a lot of teachers, and I've talked to a lot of parents. I'm just seeing the social media feeds fill up with, well, and I know my argument against this, but I just want to hear your thoughts on it because they're probably a lot better than mine, and that's why you're here. So you have this subset of the population that goes, so if just because a subset of the population can't be successful, why can't, if 20% of the students can't be successful because of lack of access or lack of this, why can't the other 80% continue? Why can't we have grades, and why can't we continue like measuring their success so they can get their credit or graduate, like all these other things? Now, I know exactly where I stand on this and I know why this is the case, but I would just love to hear your general argument for, you know, if it's not equitable for all, it's not okay. You know what I mean? Like, because I think that's a really important argument to make in this situation, just in case people are running into some of those arguments.
I think that the problem is with this is that people are equating equity for equality. Just because you give everybody the same thing doesn't necessarily mean that that's equity. Equity is when those 80% say, you know what? I have the privilege to have what I have. And so therefore, that's, my kids are okay. They're able to, keep going and learning and things of that nature. However, the 20% don't have that same access. So now we need to change the system. But to be honest, this 80-20 thing has been occurring. I mean, I don't know if those are the real statistics and numbers, but this is, I like what you pulled out. I mean, whatever. But this has been education since, God knows, since it was created, this divide about the haves and the have-nots, right? But I think that the most important part to this is that equality it doesn't exist right now, and it never has. Like, you can't give everybody the same thing and think that they can use those tools, because there's so many exogenous factors that impact that student's success. And even those who are saying, okay, well, my child should still be getting grades and should still be, having that same access and things, we should be able to move forward. You really don't know what kind of roadblocks you're going to run into as things progress. And then at that point, that's when we start to hear the argument change. So I think that the main thing is, like I continuously say, there's a big difference between equity and equality. So if you feel like your child will be able to continue to perform, you can homeschool them and you can give them extra to assist. However, for the rest of the students, I think that we need to go back to our original conversation and focus on those socio-emotional needs and making sure that all is well.
Yes, I love the equity versus equality, right? So equality is generally, a lot of times those two things get conflated with one another when they're vastly different, right? Equality is everyone gets the same thing. Equity is everyone has access to what they need to be successful with those resources, right? And as an educational institution, we have a responsibility to provide that equitable access to quality education. So it is actually a disservice to any student who can't access those materials. And that is just a huge point. So Alex Valensek just said, he wants to know, let's just buy them devices and pay for their internet. Can you respond? So I love your facial expression right now for those listening on the podcast. She had a little bit of like a nod and like, come on now. Like look, which was just amazing to see in live time right now. I just need for everyone to appreciate that. I have a response to this, but I really want to hear your take on it. I really want to hear your thoughts on, hey, if it's inequitable, we have all these funds we're not spending on our schools being open. Let's buy every kid a Chromebook and let's pay for their internet. Problem solved, right?
But then there's still layers to that, right? So then now,
yes.
how do you instruct the student on using this nice Chromebook? How do you make sure that they understand how to download the programs, how to use the programs? And then the next layer to that is going to be, okay, we've already just sent them the Chromebook and the internet. Now we're going to sit here and we're going to start talking about their parents. Well, if their parents were there, they would be able to assist them. So it's going to start another layer to this. So I don't think that just throwing the Chromebook and internet package would be helpful to students, because there's more to that. You have to actually sit there and help them operate, which I would hope that you would do in school, right? So we have to make sure that we're still giving them the access on how to use these types of programs, how to download things, how to work with them. So it's not just throwing money at a situation. It's actually being there to teach and help them develop and go through the process.
Yeah, so I want to make a correction real quick. I think the way I posed that question was saying that Alex was saying that. He was not saying that. He was actually quoting what he's been hearing. He's a fantastic Illinois administrator, director of instruction in his district. And I don't think he would say that ever, because he's a very thoughtful educator. He was merely saying, I'm seeing this written a lot. Can we respond to it? I just want to be very clear for those listening and for those watching, that was not coming from Alex. That was a reference to something he's been seeing. And I think we've all seen that a little bit, right? Let's just put a Band-Aid on it, give them the tools. And by that same argument, couldn't you make the same argument? But hey, we're giving them all the same math book. Why can't they all equitably be successful in math? Well, no, because we still have to deal with their individual needs as students in the classroom, pedagogically and socio-emotionally. Nothing changes. The technology is just the equal access. We're not dealing with the equitable access to the environment to use the device, the training to be successful in using the device, the parents that support the learning, and things like that. So Joe Gonzalez just mentioned, and I just want to bring this up. He said, yes, I've learned that my students don't know how to use our learning management system and are having trouble to troubleshoot minor problems. So just because you assign something on Google Classroom or your learning management system doesn't mean your students know inherently how to access it. While in terms of equity, some students that are native to technology and have it in their homes and their parents use it and they've been immersed in this might not have as much of an issue as a student who has 0 devices and their cell phone is the only device that they've ever interacted with. And now they're being asked to use this vastly more complicated Chromebook to do all of their learning on. And those are really things we have to talk about. So I'm really glad you shined a light on some of those things. And I think that's an important aspect of this discussion. So we're coming up at about 30 minutes, and I don't want to take your whole morning, Shemaine, but I do want to hold you for a little bit longer. Is that okay?
That's cool. Can I add one thing to that discussion
please,
too?
I was just going to say, please pile it on.
I I think another layer to this that we're not thinking about, even in that, and I know that that's not what Alex was saying, but another layer to this is we need to think also about our students who are receiving special education services as well as our English language learners. Those are two groups that usually have, and I think I was reading something where the population of students who receive special education services is around 14%. Our English language learners are one of our fastest growing populations in our schools. And so when we're talking about just, providing devices, or when we're talking about even this whole, e-learning situation, we have to also think about how are students who are receiving these types of services being taught. How are they learning? How are things going with them? Because usually they have some form of sheltered instruction, or they have someone to aid them in their learning. And now they're at home. And so we have to be mindful of that as well. And I think that's something that's not being highlighted enough.
Yeah, and so I think a last sort of segment that we can go into here is talking about school as a provider of equitable access to more than just education, right? Because I think what we've highlighted multiple times is it's not just about buying them internet and the Chromebook and then everything's honky-dory. It's not just about, hey, everything's digital now, so we're good, right? Everyone can go back to normal. There is this huge component of things we do as teachers, things we do as schools, and things districts do to provide a safe, equitable, and environment where students can hopefully thrive. Now, I also want to put a asterisk there, because in my own head, I'm going, yeah, there's still a lot of work to do there. So I don't want to pretend.
I was thinking that.
I was kind of scared you were going to go there in a second ago, but in my own head, I'm like, well, there's still a ton of work we need to do in terms of equity in the physical place of schools. But I do think a lot of what we're going through right now has shifted our understanding of where those inequities come from, because now we're getting a magnified look at why those things exist in the physical space of school from the home environment, as well as things like how can we now modify the school environment to react and support some of the needs that students are bringing in from them that we are now aware of, because we can't ignore them, right? We can't just say, hey, we now know so much more about your needs, but we're going to go right back to the way things were. So as schools and leaders, which by the way, we are actually having a leadership meeting, a mastermind on Wednesday. So there's a ton of educational leaders from across the country. We're going to have a mastermind on Wednesday just to get their take on everything that's going on. But as these leaders go back to the schools, as these teachers go back to schools, what should they do with all this new context that they have? Like, how can they apply that so that their classroom is better than when they left it?
I think this is that part that I have been pushing my pre-service teachers to think about, is that reimagining piece. Because while I want to believe that some of this is new information for a lot of schools and districts and administrators and teachers, I can't fool myself that way. So I'm trying to believe that, but I know that that's not true. And so what I don't want us to do is to continue to ignore the problems like we have been in the past that we see with our students and the inequities that exist in our schools. But I want us to begin to think about what can we now do differently. And sometimes that's not for you to brainstorm. A lot of times we make decisions for groups of people and we don't bring anybody from that group to the table to make those decisions. Sure. So maybe that may look like a town hall where you have parents involved and children involved that are in the schools, and you're having conversations to ask them, okay, now that we're opening schools back up, and we've seen what, has happened through COVID-19. And I was able to see some of the disparities that exist because maybe I never saw them before. Now, what does that look like for you as far as learning? How can we serve you? I watched this show, New Amsterdam. And Dr. Max always asks the people that work at the hospital, how may I help you? And he's like in charge of the hospital, but he always asks that, what would that look like if superintendents and principals and teachers said to their students and parents, how may I help you? And then you take that information and together you co-construct what learning will look like for their children, what teaching will look like. And teachers need support too. So that's asking them, how may I help you? What do you need? What is something that we can do to make sure that you have what you need? And then also thinking about the future. How can we be proactive? We never in a million years probably imagined that everything would be shut down right now.
Right.
But those are the circumstances. So in the future, if we ever do have to move from being in a actual school space to taking school home, how can we make this a smoother transition? How can we begin to have conversations so that we can think about the equity or the inequities that this may cause? And so I think it's more of a conversation of getting parents involved and not just having a meeting at 5:00 and wanting them to come in. That might call for you to have multiple times, because we have to understand that many different parents, it's not that they don't want to be involved in their children's lives, but they work different times of the day to provide for their children.
Absolutely.
So I think that there's a lot of layers to this. But I think mostly the most important part and the most important things that can be done right now is to ask people, how can we move forward in a way that you can get what you need from education?
I love it. We've uncovered a giant gorilla or elephant in the room. We can't just put the blanket back on it, right? We know it's there and it's been magnified and identified. Now, it was there the whole time, like you're saying, but I think it's definitely been, I think that's a great point. I don't think there's any new information that we're getting. I think we are all well aware of our students in our most dire situations, that have the most need. However, I think this situation is an opportunity to see that truly and to magnify that and bring it to the front as opposed to keeping it in the back. And I think that's a great opportunity. I love your town hall meeting. I hope that any administrator listening to this right now just got an idea for a strategic idea for going back to school. I think that's an amazing. And I also think, once again, so that's a great example of your equality versus equity. Having a meeting at a specific time in a specific place or assumes that everyone can make that meeting. That's equality. Everyone's getting a meeting, right? But equity is providing universal access to that meeting, letting people respond at multiple times and giving multiple opportunities so that you're equitably giving access. So I don't know if you meant to do that, but I thought that was a really great example.
I did.
Oh, see, you're just like sneaking stuff in here. You're like one of my favorite people right now. You're just like,
stop it. You're so good for somebody's self-esteem. I need to talk to you more often.
Anytime you got my number. Like we can talk anytime you want, just so you know, after this is over, like we're like that. Okay. So
besties.
So absolutely, like providing those equitable scenarios. And that's not just a thing with parents. Like think about that with your students' education. If you're doing a live video lesson, is it recorded with the ability for students to ask questions later on in the day too? Because maybe they're watching their siblings early on in the day and they can only get on from 2 to 4 because that's when their parents get home from work before they go to their second job or something crazy, like depending on, what their situation is. So Brianne Fennell just said, parents being able to call into IE meetings could be something that helps future parents. So this is one of those things that I think you're talking about of we're finding solutions. So this is something I've heard multiple teachers talk about, having digital IEP meetings, and how many parents have been like, this was so much nicer than having to drive to the school, right?
Yeah.
I've worked in school districts that are food deserts where parents don't have cars, where parents can't afford gas. So driving to the school becomes a huge issue. Getting off of work becomes a huge issue. So now you're saying on a 15, 20-minute lunch break, or from their home, they can call into an IEP meeting and take care of what they need to. Like that's some equity that we can now see, for all stakeholders in education. I think that we can provide.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much. So I'm going to let you get back to your day. I'm sure your family is waking up just like mine probably is as well. I'll let you get some of your tea since you don't drink coffee, right? But
I love it.
Shemaine, thank you so, so much. I want to thank Alex, Brian, Eric, Brian Zwimke, all of you people who were joined in. There were like 40 other people that I don't, Mike, Lisa, you guys are fantastic, commenting, listening in, and contributing to this conversation. Martha Tompkins just signed in and is watching. Martha, I hope you're having a great morning. Please rewind and see some of the amazing value that Shemaine brought. So I truly appreciate it. Shemaine, what's one parting message that you would like to sort of wrap things up with before we kind of sign off for the morning?
I'm going to go back to that letter I wrote to my students. I think that we have to center grace, empathy, and equity. One of the things that I also included in that letter is I know that the objective of the course was to teach you how to be a professional educator through lesson planning and talking about classroom behavior supports. I said, and that's all good. You got most of that from me throughout the semester. I said, but one of the things that I think is valuable that I can teach you right now and model for you is how to implement grace, not only to your students, but to yourself as teachers, how to be empathetic and think about what other people are going through. And then also how to think about equity, looking at circumstances and situations and thinking about, am I promoting equity or am I promoting equality? And I think that is something that we need to think about and keep in the forefront of our minds as not only as we finish out this school year, but also as we enter into next school year, because I think that next school year is also going to be a critical time for a lot of students and teachers and administrators, because we're coming out of a crisis and now we're all coming back together. And there was some data that was shared this week, or between last week and this week, about the disproportionality with who has COVID-19. And when we look at the Black population and we look at the communities that are impacted, and it's mostly Black communities, think about when those students come back into school in the fall. We don't know who they've lost. We don't know who has been impacted. And so now we're going to have to change the way that we do business. They can't be traumatized in their communities and homes and then come to school and be re-traumatized. So we're going to have to think about that grace, empathy, and equity as we move forward.
So you're definitely getting some props here on the live.
Thank y'all.
User said, great job today, Shemaine. You're a fantastic speaker and very motivating, which I 1,000% agree with. So with that in mind, I think you said that super eloquently and just perfectly. So I don't really want to add anything to it, right? But one thing I think that highlights, though, is that this is not a sprint. And we've talked about this on the Teach Better team a ton through these live drop-ins. This is a marathon. This isn't just a right now thing. This is a later thing too. So we don't need to focus all our resources on right now, getting through the day, getting through the week. We need to focus long-term and have that long-term lens of, now that this has happened, what do we do coming back? And I think that's going to be an evolving conversation, because we don't know who our students have lost. We don't know who our teachers have lost. And we don't know what everyone's been through for the last X amount of months that they haven't been in this safe space. So with that, give yourself grace, give your students grace. This is going to be okay, but we're going to get through this better on the other side. Even if the elephant's been uncovered, we can address the elephant now. We can address those inequalities. We can address the inequity in education a little bit better than we could before. So, Shemaine, I want to thank you so much for taking the time this morning. You have been amazing. We're going to have you back on in some way, shape, or form. I think we definitely have to just hang out and maybe do a weekly call together, just because I like you so much. So regardless, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a fantastic day. And thank you, everyone, for joining our daily drop-in this morning. Have a great morning, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.